Hello and welcome back to another episode of Police Encounters. Today we're going to go into episode 2 of Police Encounters while in a vehicle, and we're going to talk about the escalated police stop. Hello everybody, welcome back to Police Encounters. I'm Brett Knight, I'm an attorney in the state of Tennessee, and I work at the law office of Fry, Knight, and Looper. In the previous episode we talked about police encounters in a vehicle, kind of the standard police encounter in a vehicle. But today we're going to talk about the escalated police encounter in a vehicle. We're going to dig a little bit more into what happens when the police stop goes wrong, at least wrong for you. And so we'll kind of jump right in on that. And if you haven't seen the first episode and you want to kind of get the base down of, you know, the stop, why you can be stopped, how you should stop, and how you should conduct yourself during a police encounter in a vehicle, check out our episode 1 of this. But today we're going to talk about what happens when things begin to go wrong in the police stop. And the first thing you're going to probably notice, or you should be aware of, is when the officer changes their communication style or their communication technique and the language that they're using, and they go from a casual encounter to an interrogation. Now, I use the word interrogation quite often, and sometimes people think it means something maybe a little more strong than what it does. I have officers sometimes that get very upset when I ask them questions about how they interrogated a client of mine. They'll begin to get very defensive. When I use the word interrogation, what I'm meaning is the definition of it, which says if the police officer is using accusatory language, then that's an interrogation. So if you begin to feel like and notice that during your police encounter in a vehicle that the officer is beginning to use this interrogation style language, this accusatory language, you need to be aware that the currents have shifted. And we are now getting into a situation that has much more potential for problems for you. So what do I mean? What's some examples of accusatory or interrogation style language? Well, when they begin accusing you of things, pretty self-explanatory. For example, if an officer says, "I smell marijuana," or that's an accusation. They're accusing you of having marijuana in the vehicle. Or "I smell alcohol." Or they ask you questions such as, how much have you had to drink today? Have you been using any drugs today? How much currency or cash do you have in the vehicle today? And that's becoming more and more common. A lot of people don't think about the fact that, you know, we're free to carry currency around with us, and we are. But a lot of officers use that as a basis to search your vehicle and to actually make an arrest if you have a large amount of currency in your vehicle. I've defended many business owners, people who are buying vehicles and such, and they had a large amount of cash on them, and it got them into legal problems, which is very frustrating for me as a kind of a constitutional protection person. I think we should be able to go around and about with cash if we want to, and it's really nobody's business. But there is an issue there, and it often has to be defended. So if these accusatory language, you start to notice that in the encounter, again, you need to be aware of that, and you need to be very, very cautious. And then go back to the advice I gave in episode 1 here. This is especially when you need to be very careful about what you're saying and what you're answering. You need to remain silent. Silence is golden, so take advantage of it. If they're asking you questions about smelling alcohol or smelling marijuana, you don't need to answer those questions. If they ask you, have you been drinking today, you should just politely say, officer, I'm not answering any questions. I've been advised not to answer any questions. I don't want to answer any questions. Or you could just simply ask, officer, am I free to go? Am I under investigation for something? It's appropriate at this time when these accusatory kind of questions begin coming. It's very appropriate at that point to ask the officer, am I being detained or am I free to go? Because not just for your own self and not just to let the officer know that you're not really going to participate in this exploration, that you want to go about your day and shorten this encounter, but it also helps in potential legal defense going forward, that you've established when exactly did this officer begin detaining you, because there's certain legal proofs that have to be established that when they detain you at that moment, that officer needs to be able to articulate at a future date in the hearing. I would be asking such a question that, they need to be able to articulate the exact reason that they believe you've committed a violation of the law. They can't be exploring, they can't detain you just for the sole purpose of exploring. They have to let you go if they've concluded the reason which they pulled you over, and they cannot articulate the law that you violated, then they need to let you go. So it's important to ask that question, not just to shorten the encounter, but to also provide proof later on, if you are arrested, as to why at that particular moment you were detained. And could the officer at that moment, not later on, at that moment, could they articulate what law it was that you violated? So it's very appropriate to ask at that point whether you're free to go or whether you're being detained. Other things might happen that signal an escalation. You might be asked to leave the vehicle, to exit the vehicle. The officer may ask you to, sir, ma'am, can you get out of the vehicle? And a lot of times people ask me, do I have to get out of the vehicle? And the answer is yes. If in the state of Tennessee, and again, I'm talking specifically about Tennessee, but this applies to a lot of other areas. The officer, for their safety, that's the reason why they're allowed, for their safety, they can ask you to exit the vehicle. So you would then have to exit the vehicle and get behind the vehicle or beside it in a safe location. And you have to comply with that. To not do that would be to be resisting the officers, and that, again, adds further charges. Once you're out of the vehicle, it could escalate even further. They may, and very often do, initiate a pat-down. And what I mean by pat-down is, we probably all have seen it on TV, where they're patting a person down to feel for evidence. In particular, what they're being allowed to feel for is a weapon. Again, they're allowed to ask you out of the vehicle for their safety. They're allowed to pat you down for their safety. They're not allowed to pat you down to obtain evidence to prove some other crime. It's only for weapons. I have had many a hearing where I've been able to successfully prove that when the officer was patting down, they were not just feeling for evidence. For example, if they have something else they felt in your pocket. They can't pull what they believe to be evidence out of your pocket. They can only bring out what they believe would be a weapon or something that could harm them. So again, things that we'll have to discuss, later on down the road when it comes to that. But they do have the right to pat you down to search for weapons. They do have a right to have you exit the vehicle. Two very clear indications that this is escalated. They may ask you to search your vehicle. It's very common for them to ask, can I go ahead and search your vehicle? They will even often put pressure on you, saying, well, if you don't have anything to hide, why don't you let me search? Let me stop right there and put this in there. When you feel you are being pressured or manipulated in a situation, whether it's the officer or in some other circumstance, realize that is the point where you slow down and you don't let them manipulate you. They're trying to put you in a disadvantaged position. So when an officer is asking you, can I search your vehicle, and you say no, and they say, well, why? If you didn't have anything to hide, they're just trying to guilt you into it. Do not let that situation become one where you're being manipulated. You have a right to say no. You have an absolute right to say no and not consent to a search. I advise my clients to never consent to a search. Nothing good comes out of it. It either takes up your time, prolongs the encounter, or two, it turns into something that could provide proof of some crime or some proof of what they believe is a crime that you then have to defend yourself on. You might have, your husband or wives or mothers or fathers or grandparents' medicine in your vehicle. Well, now all of a sudden you have, prescription medication without a valid prescription for you. You're not allowed to have their medicine with you or on you or in your vehicle. You might be as simple as, I've got medication, a prescription medication, and I put it into another container for convenience. Sometimes people do that not realizing it's against the law. So maybe I have a Tylenol container, and in it is also my prescription medication that I take. That way, for convenience, I have it. That could cause you problems. There are also a lot of situations in which other people who've been in your vehicle, maybe even a passenger who's currently in your vehicle, are engaged in something that you have no idea about. Maybe you've loaned the car to somebody, or maybe one of your kids have borrowed the car and one of their friends got in it and they've left something under the seat that now is going to cause a problem for you. So there are all kinds of reasons why you don't consent to a search, and so I advise my clients to not consent to a search. Now, they can get a warrant, the police can get a warrant, they can get other reasons to be able to search without your consent, and that's fine. And if they do, then you let them search. And if they search without those proper reasons outside of your consent, then that's what your attorney can deal with. It's not for you to deal with there on the side of the road. Under no circumstances should you resist the police, whether resisting them to make an arrest, even if you think that it's not just or right, to search a vehicle, even if you've told them not to and you don't believe they have reasons to. Those are issues you deal with in a courtroom later on. If you try to resist on the side of the road, you're just going to end up being charged with a felony or some other serious charge for resisting an officer. You have to deal with those later. So, don't consent to searches. Remain silent. If they do search anyway, that's something that'll have to be sorted out in court. Oftentimes people will tell me in this situation, well, I was trying to explain the circumstances to them to keep myself from being in any more trouble. If you're about to get arrested, or if this encounter has become this escalated situation, let me just go ahead and tell you, having handled hundreds of these every year, criminal cases, you will not talk yourself out of an arrest. All you're going to do is talk yourself into additional charges. If they've already decided that they're going to arrest you, your words are not going to change their mind. So remain silent even in those extreme circumstances. So they can pat you down, they can require you to step out, they can ask you for consent to search the vehicle, but you can decline that and say no. They can get a police dog to come go around your vehicle and see if they believe smells something that's illegal, an illegal substance. They have to do that within a reasonable period of time. Again, that's something your attorney can argue in court later. They cannot hold you there for an unreasonable amount of time waiting for that dog to arrive. They have to conclude the investigation based upon the reason that they pulled you over, and they can't hold you there for a long or an unreasonable period of time waiting for the dog. Now that will be determined by court, what is an unreasonable period of time. So those are some of the things that are going to happen, and it's very stressful, very scary, especially if you've never been in that kind of situation, if you're finding yourself in these escalated kind of circumstances. So what happens then if they decide they're going to arrest you, whether for good reasons or for not? What can you expect? You'll be notified at some point. Now, they may put the cuffs on you and then notify you. I've seen that, and I never really understand why. I mean, especially if somebody's not being violent or uncooperative. But sometimes they'll do that. They'll just simply, hey, can you do this, lean over this, and then they just slap the cuffs on you real fast. Anyway, I have to have an officer come explain sometime to me why they think that's a good deal. But either way, whether it's before or after the cuffs are put on, at some point you're going to be advised that you're being arrested and what you're being arrested for. Sir, ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for suspicion of driving under the influence. I'm placing you under arrest for simple possession of a narcotic. I'm placing you under arrest for, whatever it is that they're placing you under arrest for. So the question I oftentimes get is, do they have to put handcuffs on me? Most police departments have a policy that if you're being transported, that you have to be handcuffed. Some will allow you to be handcuffed in the front as opposed to the back, but most have a policy that you'll be handcuffed. Now, does that mean that there's not circumstances where they don't follow policy? Well, I'm sure that there is, but you can anticipate that if you're being arrested, you'll probably be handcuffed. You'll be booked, that's what we call it, booked, into the jail. What that means is that you'll be processed. You'll be fingerprinted, your picture will be taken, and you'll be searched and you'll be put into custody. Now, something I will say here that comes into play an awful lot, if you're going into a jail environment and you have some illegal substance on you or a weapon on you or phone on you, and the police have not found that, those items are not allowed to be brought into a secured facility like a jail. It's called introduction of contraband into a penal facility. It's a felony. So if you have a weapon, even if it's just a pocket knife that you just keep in your pocket, or a phone that the police haven't found, do not let yourself go into a secured environment without notifying the police that you have those items on you. Notifying them and putting that into their custody will keep you from getting an additional charge. All right, so you're taken into custody. It's been a bad day. Let's not make it worse. continue to remain silent. At this point, being arrested is an absolute. You need to remain silent. You need not speak with the police until you have an attorney, and that attorney is present with you when you have any conversation with law enforcement. You'll be given an opportunity to bond out. Most states do it a little bit different. Here in Tennessee, you can have a bonding agent who you can then contract with, that they will make your bond for you. Usually it's for 10% of whatever the bond amount is. What I mean by that is, let's say I'm arrested and I have a $5,000 bond. Well, I would have to pay my bond agent $500 for them to make the $5,000 bond. And then I could be released on bond, waiting for trial. And then I'd be able to hire my attorney and be present for the court. If, however, you have a bond that you're unable to make, then you'll have to rely on family or friends or somebody along that way to help you make contact with an attorney and to have them be able to represent you. Of course, and if you're not able to afford an attorney, one will be provided for you when you go to your first initial hearing at court. And I know that's a lot, and that's pretty scary. And I mean, we're talking about an escalated, police encounter. An escalated police encounter are much more likely to result in an arrest. So just want to kind of talk about that, and not trying to scare anybody or anything else. But the more information you know in this situation, the less stressful it can be. The less likely you are to make a mistake. So that's why we have these videos. Part one, we talked about kind of the standard police encounter that you could have. This one, we're talking about the escalated police encounters that could lead to an arrest. And then in part three, the final part of this series of police encounters while you're in a vehicle, we're going to talk about some specific nuanced things that might occur at a police encounter in a vehicle, such as we're going to go into more detail about searching your vehicle. We're going to talk about standardized fuel sobriety tests, blood draws, breathalyzers. We're going to talk about checkpoint stops. We're going to talk a little bit more about having currency in your vehicle. So we're going to talk more about those and what constitutional rights those touch on and what laws that they are governed by as we continue this series. But it's very important, again, like I said, that the whole purpose of this series is to educate people on what your rights are and what the laws say. I encourage you to not only watch this yourself. If you have young children or teenagers who are just beginning to drive or have just started to drive or about to start to drive, I would encourage you to talk with them about this as well, because you don't want their first encounter or first understanding of this information to be when they're on the side of the road and you're not with them and you're not able to help explain to them what it is the proper way to do this to keep them safe, or the proper way to do this that ensures and protects their rights. So we have these conversations ahead of time so that when these situations do occur, we know a little bit more about what to do. Well, I hope you found this information useful. We talked again about the escalated police encounter and what it's like and what you might expect if you're arrested from a police encounter in a vehicle. And please join us in episode 3, where we talk a little bit more about searches, standardized field sobrieties, and those other more advanced, nuanced issues that come up when you're involved in a police encounter in a vehicle. Thank you again for joining us, and as always, we encourage you to follow us here on YouTube, to follow our videos, and to click on the icon there so that you can get alerts when we put new videos out. In this particular series, Police Encounter series, we're going to talk about police encounters in your home, at work, at school, in the public, and other areas. But we also have other series where we talk about constitutional issues and legal issues that you might find of interest. So please follow us and get your alerts when we put out new videos. Take care. Hey everybody, I'm Brett Knight from the Law Office of Fry, Knight & Looper. We hope you've enjoyed watching these video episodes. We just want to clarify and make sure that everybody understands, the legal disclaimer that we always put on these videos, that these videos are put up there for information only. It's not legal advice. And the reason you can tell that it's not legal advice is, in order for us to give you legal advice, we'd have to be aware of your very specific and particular circumstances so that we could advise you based upon those circumstances. The law has a lot of gray areas, and unless we know those specific things going on with you, we can't really give you legal advice. So these videos are for information and entertainment only, and of course are not legal advice, and any By watching these videos, that doesn't create a client-attorney privilege between us. That's something that would have to take place in our office. And of course, if you ever want to reach out to us and to get specific legal advice, you may do so. However, these videos are not meant or created to do that. Take care and have a great day.